The house was too big for silence, and yet silence was all it ever held. 12,000 square feet of marble and glass and carefully chosen art, a home that had been featured in architectural magazines, admired by strangers, and envied by people who would never understand how empty a beautiful house could feel. The ceilings were high enough to swallow sound. The hallways were long enough to feel like corridors in a museum. Everything was immaculate, curated, controlled, exactly the way he had built his entire life after the day it had been shattered. He had left the office early, which almost never happened. There had been a meeting, 14 floors up, glass walls overlooking the city. His executive team arranged around a table that cost more than most people's cars, and somewhere in the middle of a quarterly projection he had, looked out at the skyline and felt an exhaustion so complete it had nothing to do with the hour. He had stood up, quietly excused himself, and driven home before noon for the first time in longer than he could remember. His driver had glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. That was one of the things he paid people for. The iron gates opened as his car approached. The long private driveway curved through manicured grounds that his groundskeeping staff maintained with the same precision he applied to everything else. He noticed the roses were blooming along the east wall. He could not remember planting them. He suspected his late wife had chosen them years ago before everything changed, before she left, before the divorce papers, before the silence that followed a marriage disintegrating in slow motion had become the permanent silence of a man raising a daughter alone. His daughter was 4 years old. She had her mother's dark curls and his watchful eyes, and she had spent most of her short life in this house being cared for by a rotation of qualified, professional, thoroughly vetted nannies who came with excellent references and knew better than to move anything out of place. The current one had arrived 3 weeks ago. She was young. Too young, he had thought when the agency sent her file, and her references were solid, but modest. A small-town girl. Community college, not university. Previous experience with a single family, not multiple placements. He had approved her conditionally because his daughter had refused to warm to the last 3 candidates, and he was running out of options. He had not expected her to matter. He stepped through the front door, his briefcase still in hand, loosening his tie out of habit. The entrance halls was as quiet as always, cool marble underfoot, tall windows letting in pale winter light, a staircase curving upward toward the private floors. And then he heard it. Laughter. Not the polite, careful laughter of household staff. Not the television. Real laughter, a child's laughter, bright and unguarded and so pure it stopped him where he stood, his daughter's laughter, coming from the living room. He could not remember the last time he had heard it sound like that. He did not move at first. He stood in the entrance hall with his briefcase still in his hand, and his tie half loosened, and he listened. The sound traveled through the house the way warmth travels through a cold room. Slowly, almost unbelievably, reaching places that had forgotten what it felt like. He had not heard his daughter laugh like that since before the lawyers, before the long silences, before the house became something beautiful and empty and full of all the wrong kinds of quiet. He set his briefcase down without thinking. He was not sure he decided to move toward the living room. He simply found himself moving. The door was partially open. He stopped just outside it, one hand resting against the frame, and looked through the gap before he crossed the threshold. His daughter was barefoot. That was the first thing he noticed. Her small feet on the pale hardwood floor, the socks she was supposed to be wearing abandoned somewhere behind the sofa. She was spinning, arms out, head tipped back, completely unself-conscious in a way that she had not been in months, in longer than months. She had developed a habit of watching him when she entered a room, as if measuring the temperature of his mood before she decided how much of herself to show. He had noticed it and not known how to fix it. It was one of the many things he carried. The nanny was spinning too. She was laughing, the same laughter he had heard from the entrance hall. easy and genuine and entirely unself-conscious. She had taken his daughter's hands, and they were turning together in slow, unsteady circles, bumping into each other and laughing harder because of it. The nanny was wearing a simple, dark sweater, and her hair had come partially loose from whatever she had tied it back with. She looked nothing like the ordered professional presence she maintained when he was home. She looked entirely herself. That was, somehow, the most striking thing about it. His daughter said something he couldn't quite hear, the Nancy responded, and his daughter dissolved into laughter again, clutching the nanny's hands, pulling her into another turn. He had a sudden, irrational awareness of how still he was, of how long he had been standing in doorways watching life happen in other rooms. He should announce himself. He knew that. He should push the door open and speak, and let them hear him. And the moment would shift into something more composed, more appropriate, more like the household he recognized. The nanny would straighten, and his daughter would remember he was there. And the invisible temperature of the room would adjust to accommodate him. He did not move. He watched his daughter tip her head back and laugh again. That same sound, unguarded and bright and real, and he felt something shift in his chest that he had no immediate name for. Not happiness exactly, not yet. Something older than happiness. Something that had been very still for a very long time and had just, without permission, moved. He stayed there another full minute, maybe longer. Time felt imprecise in a way it never was when he was behind a desk making decisions that moved markets. There, everything was measured. Everything had a cost and a calculation and a predictable return. Here, in the arch of his own doorway, he couldn't have said whether 30 seconds had passed or 5 minutes. He only knew that his hand had never lifted to push the door open. His daughter was explaining something now with great seriousness, holding up her arms to demonstrate the proper way to turn, apparently instructing the nanny rather than the other way around. The nanny nodded with theatrical solemnity and attempted the motion, deliberately exaggerating it just enough to be wrong, and his daughter immediately corrected her with the patient authority of someone who has been doing this for years. She was 6. She spoke to the nanny the way a teacher speaks to a willing student, and the nanny received it that way, earnestly, without condescension, without the faint, distracted tolerance he had sometimes seen on the faces of the previous caretakers. When his daughter spoke too long about something they found unimportant, the nanny was paying attention, genuinely. That was the detail he kept returning to. She wasn't watching his daughter the way someone watches a clock. She was watching her the way someone watches something that matters. He became aware slowly that he was gripping the doorframe. He released it. The feeling in his chest had not subsided. It had, if anything, grown more specific. He recognized it now, though he had not expected to recognize it today, or perhaps any day. It was longing, not the sharp kind, not the kind that announces itself dramatically and demands to be resolved. It was the quiet kind, the kind that lives in the body for so long it stops feeling like longing and starts feeling simply like the way things are, the permanent temperature of a life. He had forgotten it had a name. His daughter did another turn, arms wide, head back, and for a brief moment she faced the direction of the door. She didn't see him. Her eyes were closed. He didn't know what he would have done if she had. Smiled, probably, waved, stepped inside and let the room rearrange itself around his presence the way rooms always did. Watched the warmth pull back slightly, not because anyone meant it to, but because his being there changed things. He had known for some time that he changed things. He had simply decided it was unavoidable. The nanny caught his daughter mid-spin and steadied her, both of them laughing again. And then the nanny said something quietly that made his daughter press both hands over her mouth in delight at some private joke between them. He could not hear what it was. He found he wanted to. He found he wanted that small, ordinary thing to know what had made his daughter press her hands over her mouth like that, with a force that surprised him completely. He took one step forward, the floorboard gave him away. It was a small sound, barely a creak, but the house was old enough in its bones to betray him, and the nanny turned first. Her eyes found him immediately, not with the startled, guilty expression of someone caught doing something wrong, but with a kind of open, undefended look, as if she had simply been discovered being exactly who she was. There was a moment where neither of them spoke. He saw her register his presence, process it, and then make a quiet decision not to shrink. His daughter turned a half-second later. The change in her face was not what he expected. He had braced, without quite knowing he was bracing, for the familiar recalibration, the slight stiffening, the return to the quieter version of herself that she became in his presence, not out of fear. He had always known it wasn't fear, it was something more complicated and more painful, a kind of instinct she had developed, the way children develop all their most important instincts from watching him. She had learned to be careful with her feelings around him because he was careful with his. But she didn't recalibrate, not entirely. She was still breathing fast from the spinning, and her hair was loose at one side where it had come free, and she looked at him with the hands still halfway raised from where they'd been pressed against her mouth. And something in her face said, "I want to stay in this room. I don't want to go back yet." He hadn't realized until that moment that his presence had become something she needed to return from. He said nothing for a second. Then he said, simply, that he had come home early. His daughter nodded, as if this explained everything and required nothing further. The nanny spoke then. Her voice was even, not nervous, not performing ease, but actually carrying it. She said she hoped that was all right, that they had finished everything on the list from the afternoon, and that his daughter had eaten well, and that she would give them space now if he needed. He said no. The word came out with more certainty than he had intended, and he saw the nanny pause. He adjusted. He said it was fine, that she should stay, that he didn't want to interrupt. There was a brief silence in the room where all three of them existed at the same time, which was itself unusual enough that he noticed it. Most evenings the house held him separately from his daughter, each in their own orbit, moving through the same space without quite meeting in it. Now the space felt different, smaller somehow, more occupied. His daughter looked from him to the nanny and then back to him, the way children do when they are measuring whether something safe is about to become unsafe. Then the nanny did something unexpected. She looked at his daughter and asked, very simply, if she wanted to show him. His daughter's face opened like a window. His daughter ran to the center of the room. It was not a graceful movement. She was 5 years old, and she moved the way 5-year-olds move, with the full weight of her body committed to every step, arms already lifting before she had finished running, bare feet making small, soft sounds on the hardwood floor. She positioned herself in the open space between the sofa and the low table, looked back at the nanny once for reassurance, received a small nod, and then she began. He did not know what he had expected. Something simple, probably. A few turns. The kind of spinning children do when they want to demonstrate joy to an adult who has forgotten how joy looks at that size. But his daughter had apparently been practicing, because what she showed him was not random. It had a shape to it, a pattern. Arms out on the first turn, then pulled in, then released again on the downbeat of music he could not hear, but she clearly could. Some internal rhythm she had learned from the nanny that afternoon, and she was following it with a concentration so complete and so earnest that it was almost difficult to watch, not because it was imperfect, because it was entirely real. He realized he was still standing in the doorway. He made himself move into the room. The nanny had stepped back to give them space, the way someone does when they understand the difference between a moment that belongs to everyone and a moment that belongs to only two people. She had lowered herself onto the arm of the sofa, quietly, and she was watching the girl with the same attention he was, though her expression carried something his did not. It carried familiarity. Warmth that had been built across an afternoon, not just arrived at in an instant. His daughter completed what seemed to be the final turn and stopped, slightly breathless, looking at him. He said it was wonderful. He said it sincerely, which surprised him because he had expected to have to manufacture the sincerity and found that he did not need to. It was already there. The girl had given him something true, and his response was equally true. And for a moment the room held that exchange between them like something fragile and new. His daughter beamed. Then she looked at the nanny and said that the nanny had taught her the arms part. The arms part was the best part. Could he see how she did the arms? He said he could. He said he had seen. He said it was the best part. Then his daughter asked, with the complete absence of self-consciousness that belongs only to the very young, if the nanny would do it too so that he could see it done properly. There was a brief pause. He looked at the nanny without quite meaning to. She was looking at him, measuring something, and he understood she was waiting for permission she did not technically need, but was choosing to ask for anyway, and he found he respected that without being able to explain why. He gave a small nod. It was barely a gesture at all, more like the idea of a nod, but she received it and understood it and did not make it into more than it was. She stepped back slightly into the open space where the furniture receded toward the window, and she did the arms. That was all. She simply did the arms the way she had been teaching his daughter to do the arms. A slow upward arc on one side, and then the other. Wrists soft, fingers slightly parted, the movement unhurried, and without any performance in it. She was not performing for him. She was doing it because the girl had asked, and because she had said she would, and that was the complete extent of her reason. He understood this, and he did not know what to do with it. His daughter watched her with absolute devotion. She mirrored the motion, smaller and less precise, but no less earnest, and her little wrists bent the same way, and her fingers opened the same way, and they stood there for that brief moment doing the same thing together, the woman and the child, and the late light from the tall windows crossed them both, and the room which had been so long a quiet and expensive and thoroughly empty room was not empty anymore. He was still standing in the doorway. He became aware of this fact in the way a person becomes aware they have been holding their breath, a sudden conscious recognition of something the body had been doing without instruction. He shifted his weight. He crossed the threshold properly and moved to one of the chairs near the low table and sat down, not because he was tired, but because standing in the doorway felt like something he needed to stop doing. His daughter came to him immediately. She pressed herself against his knee and looked up at him with the guileless directness that he loved so much, and that sometimes he could not bear, because it required so much of him in return. She asked if the nanny could teach him too. He said he did not think so. She asked why not, and he said because some things required practice, and he had missed the practice part. She accepted this without argument, which meant she was already thinking of something else. And she turned back toward the nanny and asked if they could do the jumping part again. The nanny looked at him. It was a brief look, professionally calibrated, asking, without asking, whether the dynamic of the room had changed enough that she should reorient the afternoon. He recognized the professionalism and was grateful for it. He told her to go ahead. He said he would sit here. He said it calmly, and the nanny nodded and took the girl's hand and moved back into the middle of the room and began counting softly. 1, 2, 3, and his daughter tensed with anticipation. And he sat in the chair with his hands resting on his knees and watched the two of them together and felt something shift in him that he did not yet have a name for. They jumped. His daughter leaped with both feet, and her arms flew out sideways, and the sound she made was not quite a word, more a burst of pure sensation, the kind children release when their bodies finally do exactly what they imagined. The nanny caught the rhythm and jumped with her, lighter, more controlled, but genuinely present in the movement, not performing it for his benefit or for the child's approval, but simply doing it because that was where she was and that was what the moment asked. He watched. He had not sat in this room, in this chair, in this particular stillness in a very long time. He was usually passing through. He was usually on the way to somewhere else, or his phone was in his hand, or there was a document open on a screen nearby, requiring his attention, because his attention was the only resource the company never stopped demanding. But he sat now and he watched, and the thing that had shifted in him continued to shift, slow and tectonic, the way large things move when they finally decide to move. His daughter was laughing again. He noticed the way she kept looking at the nanny, not to check whether the nanny approved of her, not the anxious glancing he sometimes caught from her in his own direction, as though she were calibrating herself against his expression. She was looking at the nanny because looking at the nanny was simply joyful, because she trusted what she would find there. That distinction cost him something to recognize. He thought about what the nanny had said to him in the kitchen several days earlier, when she had not known he could hear. She had told his daughter that missing someone was not the same as being broken. She had said it quietly and matter-of-factly, the way a person says something they believe entirely. He had stood in the hallway and felt it land in him somewhere unexpected, and he had walked away before she could see that it had. He thought about that now. The jumping wound down naturally, the way a song ends not with a stop but with a resolution, and his daughter came toward him, breathing hard and flushed at the cheeks, and climbed partly onto the arm of the chair in the unself-conscious way she sometimes still did when she forgot to be careful with him. He did not move away. He put one hand loosely at her back to steady her, and she did not seem to notice because it felt natural to her, which meant it had not always felt natural, which meant something between them was quietly, incrementally changing. The nanny stayed where she was across the room. She was straightening the rug with her foot, giving them space without making a performance of giving them space. That restraint, he was beginning to understand, was not accident. It was a kind of intelligence he had not expected and had not known to look for. His daughter said she was hungry. He said then they should probably do something about that. The kitchen was a room he had learned to pass through rather than inhabit. It was large and well appointed in the way that rooms are when they have been designed by someone who imagined how a life should look rather than observed how a life is actually lived. There was expensive stone on the counters and copper fixtures that caught the light, and a window over the sink that faced the garden, and most evenings it sat unused while his daughter ate something prepared by staff at a small table off to the side. He had told himself this was efficiency. He had told himself a great many things. The nanny moved through the space without hesitation, which surprised him. She was not performing comfort she did not feel. She genuinely seemed to know how to be in a kitchen, how to open a refrigerator, and take an inventory with her eyes in 3 seconds, and make a quiet decision from what was available. She found eggs. She found cheese and a half-eaten loaf of bread, and a small bunch of wilting parsley that she examined and deemed still usable. She asked his daughter if she liked scrambled eggs, and his daughter said yes, but only if they were soft, not the rubbery kind, and the nanny said she fully agreed about the rubbery kind, and that rubbery eggs were a tragedy that should not be inflicted on anyone. His daughter laughed. It was a small laugh, conversational, the kind of laugh that happens between people who are already comfortable rather than trying to become comfortable, and he noticed it the way he had begun noticing small things, carefully, without reacting, the way a man notes weather changing, without yet being certain what it will become. He stayed. He did not know entirely why. He could have gone back to the study, back to the correspondence that was waiting in the particular patient way that work always waited for him, with no feelings about it either way. But he pulled out a stool at the counter and he stayed. The nanny did not make anything of this. She did not look at him with meaning, or shift her posture to include him, or make a small remark about it being nice that he was there. She simply cooked. She talked to his daughter about small things while she cooked, about the jumping, about whether socks made it better or worse, about a television program his daughter apparently loved that he had never watched and had not known she loved. He filed that away. At some point, she handed him a piece of bread without looking up and said the pan needed a minute. He took it without thinking about whether he was the kind of man who accepted bread handed to him in his own kitchen. He just took it. It was warm from being near the stove, and he ate it standing there while his daughter set herself up at the kitchen island with total authority, arranging things the way she apparently liked them, and he realized he had not known she had strong opinions about that either. The meal was simple. That was the thing he kept coming back to afterward, turning it over like a coin he didn't recognize. It was simple food, the kind of food that required no occasion and made no claim. Pasta with something bright in it, bread. A salad his daughter actually ate without negotiation, which he would have marked as significant if he hadn't been trying not to mark anything as significant. They ate at the kitchen island instead of the dining table. He was not sure how that had happened. One moment the plates were being set, and then they were there, the three of them in a loose arrangement around the curved counter, and the dining room with its long table and its 8 chairs sat unused in the next room the way it always did. His daughter talked. That was the other thing. She talked the way children are supposed to talk at dinner, the way he had seen children talk in other houses when he was a guest, and felt the low hum of something missing when he went home. She talked about the jumping, and then about school, and then about something she had seen through the window that afternoon, a bird doing something she found suspicious. The nanny responded to all of it with the specific seriousness that children require, not performing seriousness but actually giving it, asking follow-up questions he would not have thought to ask. He ate and he listened. Once or twice his daughter looked at him when she was telling a story. Not to check on him, just including him the way you include someone standing in the same room, because they are there, and you have enough room in the story for one more person. He nodded when she looked at him. He asked one question. His daughter's face opened slightly when he asked it, not dramatically, not the way it would in a story someone was trying to make you cry watching. Just a small opening, like a door that was not locked and had simply needed someone to try the handle. The nanny cleared the plates without making it a moment. She talked to his daughter while she cleared them, still the same easy talk, and he stayed where he was on the stool and did not reach for his phone and could not have explained why. Later, when his daughter had been put to bed by someone other than him, and he was standing in the kitchen alone, he looked at the space where the three of them had been, the island, the 3 stools, 2 plates she had washed, and one he had carried over without thinking about it. He had eaten dinner in his own kitchen. He had asked his daughter a question, and she had answered it, and looked at him as though this were a reasonable thing for a father to do. He stood there for a while with the lights still on and the house still warm from the cooking, and he did not feel the specific silence he usually felt when the evening arrived. He went to bed later than usual and did not sleep quickly. This was not unusual for him. Most nights his mind ran through the same channels. Meetings, numbers, calls he had not returned, decisions that needed him, and only him, because there was no one else to share the weight. But tonight the channels were quieter than normal, and what ran through them instead was not business. It was smaller things, the way his daughter had tilted her head when she laughed, the way the nanny had not looked at him when she said the thing about the garden, as though she knew it might mean more than a sentence, and had given him room to take it, or leave it the 3 stools. The fact that he had carried his plate over without thinking. He lay in the dark of a room that was very well designed for sleeping. The right curtains, the right temperature, the right kind of quiet. And he thought about how rarely a room's qualities matched what a person actually needed. In the morning, he was up before either of them. He stood in the kitchen and made coffee and looked at the yard through the glass. The garden she had mentioned, which he had walked past every morning for 3 years without actually seeing it. The light was early and low, and the yard held it in a way that was almost architectural, the way certain kinds of light can make a space feel like it was built for exactly this hour. He had bought this house for its structure, its location, its value. He had not bought it for mornings like this. He was not sure he had ever had a morning like this in it. His daughter came down, still soft from sleep, hair loose, carrying the small stuffed rabbit she had stopped carrying in public but still kept close, at home. She saw him at the counter and paused the way she sometimes did when her expectations didn't match what she found. Then she came to the kitchen and climbed onto one of the stools and set the rabbit on the counter beside her. He poured her a small glass of juice without being asked. She looked at it, then at him. He did not make a speech about it. He slid it toward her and turned back to the coffee. After a moment, he heard her drink. When the nanny came downstairs, she stopped briefly at the edge of the kitchen, reading the room the way she always seemed to do before entering it. He had noticed that about her. She looked before she moved. She measured what a space needed rather than simply filling it. He told her there was coffee. She said thank you and meant it without performing gratitude, which was something he had not known he was tired of until he met someone who did not do it. The morning arranged itself around the three of them without any of them arranging it. That morning broke something open in him that he could not immediately name or locate. It was not a grand rupture. It was smaller than that, closer to the way a door that has been warped shut for years will suddenly release. Not because of any single effort, but because of accumulated warmth working on it slowly until the wood finally relents. He watched her help his daughter with her coat before school. They had developed a small ritual around the buttons. His daughter liked to do the bottom ones herself, and she had figured that out without being told, standing back and waiting with a patience that was not strained or performative, but simply genuine. When the last button was fastened, she smoothed the collar, and his daughter looked up at her with an expression he had not seen directed at anyone in a long time. The expression was uncomplicated. It was trust without condition, and it undid him quietly. He drove his daughter to school that morning instead of sending the car. She fell asleep against the window after 4 minutes, the rabbit tucked against her side, and he drove in silence looking at the road, but thinking about what it meant that a stranger, because she had been a stranger, she had come with references and a soft voice and a willingness to take a position his own sister had called temporary at best, had done in a matter of weeks what 2 years of expensive child therapists and careful management had not done. She had simply stayed. She had gotten down on the floor. She had twirled. After he dropped his daughter at school, he sat in the parked car for a few minutes longer than he needed to. He thought about the evening before. He thought about her on the porch, honest and undefended, telling him what she needed without apology. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she said it, not waiting to see if he would be angry, not preparing a retreat, just standing there being exactly herself in a way that cost her something, and cost it anyway. He had spent 2 years surrounded by people who needed things from him and had learned to manage them by managing his own face, his own tone, his own proximity. He had made himself into something efficient and contained because efficiency and containment had seemed like the only responsible options after everything fell apart. She did not need anything from him that would compromise him. She needed reasonable hours and honesty, and to be seen as a full person and not an extension of his household systems, and these were not complicated things. They were the simplest things. They were things he should have known how to offer. He drove back to the house. She was in the kitchen washing the breakfast dishes, even though that was not her job, and she was not making a point about it. She was just doing it because they needed doing. He stood in the doorway, a moment longer than necessary. He said her name. She turned from the sink, hands still wet, a dish towel half raised. She looked at him the way she always looked at him when she was uncertain. Not frightened, just careful. Reading the room the way someone learns to read rooms when they have spent a long time in rooms where the weather could change. He said he wanted to talk to her. She nodded and dried her hands and waited. He told her that he had done the drive twice. He told her he had sat in a parking lot on the far edge of the city and thought about the kind of person he had become over the past 2 years and whether that person was someone his daughter deserved to grow up believing was the only version of a man available to her. He told her that he had been mistaking control for care and distance for protection, and he understood if she had already made her decision, and he would respect it completely. She had not moved from her place near the sink. He said that what he actually wanted, not what was convenient or strategically sound or safe, was for her to stay, not because the household needed her, not because his daughter needed her, though she did, in the particular way that a child needs someone who makes her feel like her whole self is welcome. He wanted her to stay because somewhere between the first week and now he had started waking up and thinking about whether she had eaten enough for breakfast, and whether she was cold, and whether she was happy. And he had not thought about anyone that way in a very long time, and he did not think it was something he could simply manage away. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said that she had not packed anything. He said he knew. She said she had thought about leaving anyway, several times. She said she had talked herself out of it each time, for reasons she had told herself were about his daughter, and not about him, and she had believed herself every time, right up until the moment she didn't. He crossed the kitchen. He did not rush it. He stopped in front of her and lifted one of her hands, still faintly damp from the dishes, and held it between both of his, and she looked up at him with that same clear, unguarded look she had given him the night before, the one that cost her something, and she gave it anyway. Outside, small feet came thundering down the hallway, and a small voice called out wanting to know if there was going to be pancakes, and they both turned toward the sound of her, and the morning light came through the window over the sink. And the house, the big, expensive, previously silent house, felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, like a home.